You've heard of World War II. You've definitely heard of Vietnam. But what about the war sandwiched right between them? I'm talking about the Korean War. It's often called America's Forgotten War, which is kind of strange because it was this brutal, incredibly important conflict that really set the stage for the rest of the Cold War. So why don't we talk about it more? Let's figure that out. And that's really the central puzzle here, isn't it? We're talking about a conflict with millions of casualties, a war that technically is still going on today. You've got troops still staring each other down across a heavily armed border. So how in the world does something like that get forgotten? To get to the bottom of it, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. All right, so let's set the scene. World War II is over. The old world order is shattered, and the new superpowers are basically redrawing the map. And right in the middle of all this is the Korean Peninsula. So Japan had occupied Korea for decades, but with their defeat, the Allies had to decide what to do. The solution? They drew a line right across the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union would manage things in the north, and the United States would handle the south. Now, this was only supposed to be temporary, just a simple administrative line. But it pretty quickly became a very real, very hard border between two totally different worlds. Now, to really get why America was even there, you have to understand this one huge idea: containment. This was the absolute bedrock of U.S. foreign policy. The thinking was, communism is like a line of dominoes. If you let one country fall, the next one will go, and the one after that. So the goal was simple: contain it. Stop it from spreading, no matter what. And Korea? Well, it was about to become the first big bloody test of that entire doctrine. And this right here shows you just how deep that divide was. In the north, you've got a communist state led by Kim Il-sung with the full backing of the Soviet Union. And in the south, a government led by Syngman Rhee, backed by the US. You have two Koreas, two completely opposing ideologies, and two superpowers using them as proxies. You can just feel the tension building. A fight was practically guaranteed. And that fight? It came way sooner than a lot of people thought. This was the moment of truth. Was this whole containment thing just a bunch of talk? Or was the United States and the West actually willing to go to war for it? On June 25th, 1950, all that simmering tension just exploded. North Korean troops, armed with Soviet tanks, just poured across the 38th parallel. This wasn't a border skirmish, it was a full-blown invasion. The goal was to reunite Korea under communism by force. And honestly, the rest of the world was caught completely off guard. For President Truman back in the White House, this was it. This was the domino. He saw this not as some regional civil war, but as a direct challenge from Stalin and the entire communist world. He believed that if they did nothing, it would just invite more aggression elsewhere. So he acted fast, committing U.S. troops and rallying the United Nations to form a coalition to defend South Korea. So let's talk about the war itself, because it was anything but a straight line. It was this incredible, brutal back and forth, a total seesaw of a conflict where the front lines were constantly and dramatically shifting. The whole thing was just a roller coaster. At first, the North Koreans were unstoppable, pushing the U.S. and South Korean forces into this tiny corner of the peninsula called the Pusan Perimeter. It looked like it was all over. But then, bam! General MacArthur pulls off this genius, incredibly risky amphibious landing at Incheon, behind enemy lines. It completely flips the script. The UN forces chase the North Koreans all the way up to the Chinese border. But then, China gets involved, sending in hundreds of thousands of volunteers who push the UN forces all the way back down south. And after all that, where does the fighting grind to a halt? Right back where it started, around the 38th parallel, in a bloody, miserable stalemate. So, after 3 long years of some of the most brutal fighting imaginable, the major combat finally starts to die down. But the way it ended, or more accurately, the way it didn't end, well, that's the whole key to understanding why this war is both so important and so forgotten. On July 27, 1953, the main players sign an armistice. Now, an armistice is not a surrender. It's not a peace treaty. It's basically an agreement to stop shooting at each other. A ceasefire. It's what created the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, that still separates North and South Korea today. And this is the kicker. This is the single most important thing to remember. The armistice stopped the fighting, but it never officially ended the war. No peace treaty was ever signed. So technically, North and South Korea are still at war, just frozen in a 70-year-long standoff. So we come back to our question, why is this war forgotten? Well, think about it. It permanently split Korea in two.
It showed the world the US would absolutely go to war to stop communism, which directly set the stage for Vietnam. But it didn't have a clear good guys win ending like World War II, and it didn't tear America apart at home like Vietnam did. It ended in a messy, unsatisfying draw. And that kind of story, well, it's just a lot harder to tell and a lot easier to forget.
So I'll leave you with this to chew on. In a world that's still full of ideological clashes, proxy wars, and tense borders, what can we learn from a war that was never won, that never really ended, and that so many have forgotten? The lessons from this conflict might just be more relevant today than we'd like to admit.